Exactly. And that's exactly what I hear. What Yamiche just said is what I hear from all the Trump supporters that I talk to who were Trump voters and are still Trump supporters. They go, yeah, you guys are going crazy. He's doing, what are you so surprised about? He's doing exactly what he said he's going to do.
Well, and I think that the dangerous, edges here are that he's trying to undermine the media, trying to make up his own facts. And it could be that while unemployment and the economy worsens, he could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think. And that is our job.
Yeah, if you look at the...
Hey, how's it going? So, New Zealand is an interesting country, Lots of people really like us. They think we're pretty chilled out, seem like the kind of country you could get a beer with, And it's true in part, I think we're all right. We're not too bad. But so because of that, you might think, oh, well, maybe the news media in New Zealand isn't quite so insane and ideologically gripped as the media in, for example, the US or the UK or Australia. And if you thought that, you'd be wrong. So we're going to be looking at an article today. Follow the Leader, Why Did America Fall for the Alt-Right? By Philip Matthews. I was going to do a video on Jordan B. Peterson today, or at least an article about Jordan Peterson coming to New Zealand. But then when I was doing some research, I read this article and yeah. So I'm making it on this instead. So let's have a look at it, shall we? Right, we're just going to go through it. I haven't scripted this, so I have read it, partly, most of the way through, and then I was like, nah, doing a video on this. And let's do an article correction, because there are very few sentences in this article that are factually accurate. So we will try and point those out, so that if you read this and you took it at face value, I can just give you some sort of pointers as to where it's gone wrong. So let's get into it. Racism has become respectable again, and even New Zealand is not immune, as writer David Nywert explained to Philip Matthews. Black lives to the left of me, white lives to the right. Who can keep up with US politics anymore? Sorry, I'm a bit stuttery. A year ago, hundreds of white supremacists and their fellow travellers, men with Confederate flags, swastikas, guns and tiki torches, marched in the sleepy college town of Charlottesville, Virginia. They chanted, "You will not replace us in White Lives Matter." But the weekend become truly notorious for the murder of an anti-racism protester by a white supremacist who drove his car into a crowd. Yeah, that was pretty terrible. This is America. Yeah, because it happens like every other day in America. Just white supremacist rallies, just stock standard. But was Charlottesville the start of something, or was it the end? It was the end. Well, it probably wasn't Charlottesville. I think the alt-right was the end of the alt-right by being the alt-right. A lot can happen in 12 months, and when the US news site Politico collected opinions on the first anniversary of Charlottesville, it found that some pundits thought that the shock murder and US President Donald Trump's ambivalent responses pushed the movement back underground. I don't think his responses were ambivalent. He condemned the violence on the side of the white supremacists, and he condemned the violence on the side of the anti-fascist protesters, which I think is fair enough, because both sides were violent. One side particularly violent, obviously. The anti-fascists didn't kill anybody, but, the alt-right certainly attracts crazies. So, are we talking about the rise and fall of the so-called alt-right? Actually, I just want to stop for a second, because when we're dealing with a news article that talks about the alt-right, they're pretty disingenuous about it, because alt-right hasn't always had a clear definition. It does now, but the media never uses it correctly. They never label people alt-right correctly. Well, they do at times, but they will use it incorrectly, seemingly on purpose, but, they could just be extremely incompetent. When, I can't recall exactly, but there was an excuse that the reason that they incorrectly label people alt-right was because it's just a general term used by the media to mean sort of far-right, internet troll type people, and they don't really mean white ethno-nationalists, which is what the alt-right movement is. They're white ethno-nationalists. They're like Britain for the whiteys, the US for the whiteys, and the blackies can go to Africa. They are genuinely, their ideology would be genocidal if it was carried out. So I am against the alt-right. I don't like the alt-right, and they're against that, anti-liberal, they're against freedom of speech, don't align very well with the alt-right. Very small movement though, not a very popular movement, because most people don't like genocide and they don't like claims of racial superiority. So the media has a tendency to label anybody alt-right. So when they don't put a definition on what they mean when they say alt-right, that's concerning, because they will set up an environment where people are terrified of liberals who have been called alt-right. And when I say liberal, I mean most people on the left and right of varying different opinions on things like abortion and welfare and all that kind of shit, all that kind of stock standard election policies, that kind of stuff. When I say liberal, I mean people that of any point of view on that spectrum, but who have a fundamental agreement on the way that we vote and discuss ideas, and how if you lose an election, then you have to accept the outcome. Well, by accept, I mean you don't resort to violence to overthrow. So you don't have to accept it in the sense that you could protest and you could try and win next time. Yeah, so that's what I mean by liberal. So when I say they call liberals alt-right, I mean people that generally agree in things like values like freedom of speech and they aren't their views on race and gender and sex could differ, but overall they tend to believe in equal rights. And these people tend to be, people who get called alt-right by the press are often still in this category, so it's not really fair to call them alt-right. And it makes people scared. And it makes people want to attack liberals and deplatform them and so on. So anyway, sorry, rambling. So, are we talking about the rise and fall of the so-called alt-right? Factor in the firing of former Trump advisor and far-right strategist Steve Bannon from the White House, and earlier in 2017, the public disgrace of a high-profile agitator Milo Yiannopoulos. Neither of those people are alt-right. Case in point. Who lost a major book deal over what seemed to be comments in favour of pedophilia, and you could form the impression that the threat has passed and the movement is in decline. US journalist David Nowert has a very direct response to that idea. I think that's bollocks, he says cheerfully by phone from Seattle. The movement is very much alive, and anyone who thinks it's washed up doesn't know what they're talking about. Thanks a lot, mate. Yes, the tide did go out a little after Charlottesville, and the anniversary saw a laughably small crowd of the alt-right marching in Washington, D.C., just a pathetic rabble of 24 racists, according to USA Today, dwarfed by the much larger crowds of anti-fascist protesters. There you go. No, I mean, yes, the tide went right out. It went right out after Charlottesville. It was a tiny, tiny rally. It was very small. And it's because the alt-right is so unpopular. The people that they have a loud presence in the media and online because the media gives them lots of attention and coverage, and they use the word alt-right incorrectly so often that it seems bigger than it is. And it also, you can catch people in the net of alt-right who aren't really alt-right. They're mischief makers online. They're people just trying to get a rise, and how they actually vote and act in the world might be completely different to how you would assume they would act, based on their edgy jokes, right? So don't confuse mischief makers like Milo Yiannopoulos, who also has cogent points, but is also a mischief maker. Don't confuse him with someone from the alt-right. Back in the day, he did say he was alt-right, because it was a new term, and it hadn't been well defined like it is now. We know what it is now. Back then, alt-right could have meant anything that people wanted it to mean, and it did. So people tended to assume that it meant an alternative to the mainstream right, just in general, rather than specifically being white ethno-nationalist. So people would say, well, I'm right-wing, I don't think I'm traditional mainstream right-winger. Like, Milo Yiannopoulos is a gay Jew, and he's married to a black man. He's not your classic right-winger. But back in the day when alt-right, it wasn't clear what it meant, you can see why he might have said, well, why he did say he was alt-right. We hadn't really got to the point where we're at now, where we do know what it means. And he's disavowed the alt-right. He's not associated with them. He doesn't share their values or their beliefs. He's interested in free speech. He's interested in being a cheeky little shit because, I don't know. He's interested in free speech, and he's interested in liberal values. So, again, not alt-right. Steve Bannon, I don't think he's alt-right either. I don't know enough about Steve Bannon. I probably should, but I don't. Anyway, so he's completely wrong. I think he's completely wrong about the size of the alt-right, and even if that means I'm washed up and don't know what I'm talking about, but, that's just the way it goes. But across the country in Portland, Oregon, several hundred supporters of the relatively new far-right group, the Proud Boys, amassed for a demonstration. Naiwet was there. I watched a group of 6 Proud Boys surround a black bloc anti-fascist guy who's laying in a fetal position on the street, and they're all taking turns kicking him. That's what they do. Maybe it was self-defense. Just saying. I mean, obviously, if they were just kicking the shit out of an anti-fascist guy, an Antifa guy, that's no good. Don't do that. That's not fair. We're not into that. Use speech. I thought the whole point was speech. The whole point is dialogue and ideas and debate. So don't kick the shit out of someone. However, if Antifa's kicking the shit out of you and you punch them in the face, go for it, mate. That's self-defense. And I honestly, I don't know what incident he's referring to there, but Antifa is a violent organisation. They cover their faces with masks, quite happily will kick the shit out of quote-unquote Nazis and quote-unquote alt-righters, and the media doesn't help by labelling people who aren't Nazis and aren't alt-right that way. But, even just recently, they kicked the crap out of a guy for an anti-fascist holding the US flag because he wouldn't let it go, and apparently the US flag is a fascist symbol. So there you go. And I'm not sure as well that you can really compare the Proud Boys to the alt-right either. They're not, they're Western chauvinists. So they think that Western culture is the best culture in the world, and that they want to protect Western values. That, to me, that's not an extreme way of looking at things. There is evidence to suggest that Western culture has some things to say of value, and that we should protect those ideas. And again, Western culture is a culture. It's not a race, and it's not sex, and it's not a religion. And actually, Western culture is the most liberal and supportive of diversity of race and culture, not culture exactly, but you can believe what you believe. There are certain things you're expected to do or not do, really. So long as you're not infringing on other people's liberties. It's not that concerned with race. It's not that concerned with your own personal religion, and it's not that concerned with your gender or your sexuality. So the Proud Boys, I haven't followed them that closely. They might have done some bad shit. I don't know. I listened to Gavin McInnes's podcast. Not podcast. It wasn't his podcast. It was Joe Rogan. And yeah, I thought he was an interesting fellow. Didn't come across to me like he came across cheeky. Didn't come across to me as a racist in the sense of a genuine racist. So let's keep reading. The Proud Boys are racists. Yep, they said it, even though on their website they say they're not racist. They are welcoming to all races. The Proud Boys are racist remade for a hipster age. They favour black polo shirts with yellow trim in a nod to British skinhead fashion of the 1970s and 80s. Are you sure that's what it's meant to be? I don't actually know. I'd like to see why. Anyway, and were organised by Vice magazine co-founder Gavin McInnes, who claimed they back Western chauvinism, not overt racism, although the difference is subtle and they don't elaborate. The difference between Western chauvinism and overt racism is not subtle. They are almost opposites, right? Western culture, if you value Western culture, you wouldn't value racism. If you valued Nazi culture, you might value racism. But if we're talking about Western culture in the sense of British classical liberal democratic kind of values, no, not racist. Not racist particularly. There seems to be a tendency to conflate race and culture, which I think in itself is quite racist. So anyway, continuing on. The Southern Poverty Law Centre, good old SPLC, they're never full of shit, are they? They're definitely 100% able to be trusted at all times. Never label things as hate when they're actually just opinions they don't agree with. The Southern Poverty Law Centre, the long-established hate monitoring group that employs Niwert as a correspondent, that explains everything, puts the Proud Boys in the category of general hate. That means they hate women, Muslims, transgender people, and others, rather than being single-issue haters. So because the SPLC says they're in the category of general hate, that means they hate all these people. Thank you, SPLC, for telling me what this group believes, even though on that group they say they believe something else. That's really interesting. They also epitomise one of the ways in which racism has become fashionable again through transgressive online culture and a dark sense of humour. Yeah, well, it might seem that way if you have no sense of humour. In this world, memes and GIFs are as important as flags and bumper stickers. Honest to God. Yeah, there's nothing to say to that because the internet is just a crazy place, full of hilarious memes and people shit posting, and if you take that as a sign of the rise of the alt-right, then it's a sign that you're a boomer, really, isn't it? Niwert has followed the developments. He began tracking far-right groups in the late 1970s after the Aryan nations formed in Idaho. That was more old-fashioned racism, overtly anti-Semitic, within a Christian identity framework. Oh yeah, old-fashioned racism, yeah, back when it was actually racist. Racism now is just shit like, you just call someone racist for saying something like, oh yeah, I actually think that Western values are pretty good. I think they're better than, for example, I think Sharia law is not a good thing, and I think that you should. There are too many too many refugees coming into Sweden. That's what being a racist is now. Or like saying, I think we should, I think immigration should be strictly controlled. That's racist now. Back in the old day though, Nywert's book Alt America, The Rise of the Radical Right in the Age of Trump, published in 2017, shows how these scattered groups in remote parts of the US led somehow to the White House. There were militias and armed standoffs in places like Montana before far-right fringe thinking gained a new mainstream prominence about a decade ago. I don't think far-right fringe thinking has the mainstream prominence you think it does, but it's only because the mainstream media keeps reporting on stuff as though it is. A few things happened. A black man became president, the Tea Party movement became a legitimate face of the far right, and social media in general, and YouTube in particular, gave every crank a platform. Yeah, YouTube does give every crank a platform, but it tends to be that people will go and watch sort of a few. There's demand for everything. The demand works in the same way as it does with mainstream media. So the things that are the most popular and get the most eyeballs get the most coverage. And there's a demand for really well researched and well cited work as well as sensationalism. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that creates a really beautiful battleground of ideas, and it's better to me than having a small guild of people holding the key to some carefully curated ideas that you're allowed to see, where they're trying to control what you're thinking about at any given moment. Not necessarily what you think, but... The leading crank is Alex Jones, peddler of the internet's most bizarre and dangerous conspiracy theories. That's not true. I mean, I'm sorry. I know he peddles conspiracy theories. He's just a humble water salesman. But I don't think to say the internet's most bizarre and dangerous conspiracy theories is fair. Like, you're thinking of David Icke. Anyway, Nywert has been around long enough to remember when you had to earn your way into print. You had to prove you were credible. Alex Jones could just publish the most insane gibberish and people gobble it up as credible. Well, that's the pot calling the kettle black, isn't it? That's the Nywert calling the everybody who disagrees with him alt-right, isn't it? Everyone who doesn't toe the line, the mainstream sort of hegemonic line of everybody's fucking alt-right. Like, what? Yeah, sorry, I'm not the best at ad-libbing, but honestly, like, this guy's a cunt. Anyway, the good news is that Jones has recently been taken off YouTube, denying him much of his reach. Good news, is it? Far out. That came after families of children and teachers killed in Sandy Hook school shootings filed defamation suits. Jones' gibberish included claims that the massacre was completely fake and performed by actors. He went back on that. He went back on saying that, and that's his problem. The defamation suits, the lawsuits are InfoWars' problem, and he's been dealing with those. And I think InfoWars makes a lot of money from lawsuits because often they're not, they're not legally viable. Is that how you meant to say it? Legally viable? And it's not good news that he's been taken off YouTube, denying him reach, because now how are people going to keep track of him? If we're assuming that the things he says are wrong, I haven't seen enough of his stuff. I think he's a really interesting guy. I think he's a really funny guy. I'm sure there's plenty that he's said that is completely wrong. I actually really don't want to go into what I think of his conspiracy theories personally, but if you think that everything he says is wrong and that his ideas are bad and dangerous and that they shouldn't be spread because it's creating misinformation, you can't. He has a massive audience. Taking him off YouTube and Facebook and Spotify and Apple iTunes, that doesn't get rid of him, that just buries him, and he's still going to be out there, he's still going to do what he does because he's really dedicated to it. He's a really dedicated guy, he really cares about this stuff. He's still going to be out there, he's still going to be spreading his ideas, and you won't be able to keep track of it, and you won't be able to speak against him and say, this thing that he said, oh, that's wrong because I can show you why that's wrong, and then show people why that's wrong. You can't do that anymore because nobody knows what you're talking, like only his following knows what he's talking about. So it just shows that you do not have enough faith in your own ability to debunk him. And if you can't, maybe there's a reason for that. If you can't stand up for what you believe in, that's your problem. Don't prevent everybody else from hearing what other people have to say because you are insecure in your own ideas. I honestly, there's so much to say about this, but I don't want it to be just about Alex Jones today, so we'll continue. People have been tormented in their homes by Jones's followers. No, it says people who are undergoing the worst kind of pain you can possibly imagine in the first place. Other tech companies have followed suit. Facebook suspended Jones's account. The Proud Boys were booted off Twitter. Yeah, censorship. In response, Trump said it is very dangerous when social media companies regulate the content, and he's absolutely correct. It's only a very small number of companies in a very small area with a very large amount of power over the public. It is a public square now for speech. It is such an important part of influencing people that to exclude certain viewpoints, to exclude the whole right wing, it hasn't gotten to that point yet, but it's getting there. When you exclude those viewpoints from the public square, then that to me seems very authoritarian. We'll end up with people getting very, very one-sided information and ideas, and the discussion will just be completely skewed to the far left narrative when we're just censoring all the people on the right. And what you'll find is that the people who know what's going on and don't want to be skewed, they will go, they might become more radical and more extreme because they sense that they are under attack, because they are. Their ideas are under attack, and they as people are under attack, and we don't know how far this is going to go. Is it just going to be the internet, or because MasterCard stopped some chap's PayPal. I can't remember exactly what the guy's position was, but it wasn't particularly extreme or racist. But they stopped his PayPal had to, or was it Patreon? I think it was Patreon had to cancel his account because MasterCard didn't want to be associated with this guy. So how far does it go? You can't just cut these people off from society. These voices need to be a part of society. Cutting them out is not. We shouldn't let things go in that direction. That is very dangerous. Trump was actually absolutely on point there. So sorry, rambly and incoherent. I will continue. All of which shows the obvious power of bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of truth and speaking directly to gullible minds. There you fucking have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's Mika Brzezinski. That is, I'm going to put the clip in here. That should tell you everything you need to know about how these people think of the public. They think we're idiots, they think we're children, and they think that they are a select, magical few group, this guild of people who have the sole authority to decide what truth is and what we can hear and what we can't hear. They have to curate it for us because we're too stupid. Anyway, let's move on. Fake news and internet conspiracies set the scene for the alt-right, or as historian Timothy Snyder puts it in Nowit's book, accepting untruth is a precondition of tyranny. Yeah, and do you know what else is a precondition of tyranny? I think freaking cutting out whole groups of people from the internet, from speaking, from the public square, silencing your enemies, your political rivals, is also a precondition of tyranny. You fucking idiots. So, moving on to the New Zealand part of this article. What about us? Surely rational, tolerant New Zealand is a world away from this madness. No, I mean, honestly, I'm reading this in a New Zealand paper, so clearly it's not. But we also seem to be on the alt-right radar, as the recent visit of Canadian activists Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux showed. They're not alt-right. They're not, I'm sorry. I followed that story with interest. Can we stop misusing the label alt-right, please? It's really dangerous. It leads to violence. It was impossible to move without bumping into a strong opinion about whether the Canadian pair should or should not be allowed to speak in Auckland. Some New Zealanders were naive enough to take their reasonable seeming line, it's okay to be white, at face value. Yeah, it's meant to be taken it's meant to be taken by sensible people at face value, and what's meant to happen after that is that people like you freak out about it because it's not okay to be white, and it's not okay to think it's okay to be white because you think that it means they're saying it's not okay to be not white. And it's meant to make you look like an idiot. So, and it worked. So you've clearly, honestly, to suggest earlier that I'm the one that's washed up and out of touch when you don't even know when you fall straight into that trap. Naiwe explains that this is an old rhetorical trick. Oh, thank you for explaining it when you fall straight into it. We don't hate other people, we just want to defend white people. That's what they say. Yeah, no, you clearly don't understand what it's meant to be. But Molyneux's racism becomes more overt in front of supporters in Sydney, where he delivered a long criticism of Aboriginal culture. See, again, they're conflating race and culture, the lowest rung of civilization. Well, maybe by his criteria, it is on the lowest rung of civilization, and maybe to someone else, by their criteria, it's on a high rung of civilization. But you've got to have the discussion. You've got to discuss these ideas. Silencing them doesn't make them go away. An appalled audience member helpfully tweeted the speech to those outside, and the mask of respectability was removed. Then they appeared in Auckland, or didn't as it turned out. Protests and opposition led the venue to cancelling the appearance at the last minute. Nowit thinks New Zealand did the right thing. New Zealand isn't a fucking hive mind, okay? Jesus, there were so many people that wanted to hear them speak. There was a lot of support for freedom of speech, but the far out. Anyway, it would be tempting to ignore people like Molyneux and Southern and deny them oxygen, but they have a knack for going out and creating their own oxygen. Yep, and it'll happen no matter what, like how much you shut people down. They will find their audience. So let them speak. For heaven's sake, if you disagree with them, join in the conversation. We want you there. We want you there. It's good for communities to stand up and make clear one way or another that you won't stand for this kind of hate mongering, and you don't approve of people using hateful speech against vulnerable minorities. I just don't agree that it's hateful speech, mate. I don't agree. I'd show me an example. Please, somebody tell me what you think is hateful. Which brings us to the vexed issue of free speech. After Massey University cancelled a Don Brash speech, it was strange to see a free speech protester at the university wielding the Gadsden flag that became synonymous with far-right militias and Tea Party activists. It features a yellow background, a rattlesnake, and the threat, "Don't tread on me." Don't tread on me is not really a threat, but okay. I get it. Like, if you step on it, it will bite you. Everybody's all for free speech, But free speech that is about removing other people's rights isn't the kind of speech that anybody should want to platform. Oh God, we're getting into full retard at this point. Nywit says, tolerance and intolerance are like matter and antimatter. The two can't coexist in the same place. If you have a community that is built on the principles of tolerance and then introduce intolerant voices and permit them to have full reign, it actually destroys those principles. Only if your principles are so weak that you can have them destroyed just like that. It doesn't destroy the principles. If your principles are so fucking good, then you should be able to stand up with those other voices, speak, and people will agree with you and they'll side with you. And if people consistently seem to be siding with the so-called intolerant voices, maybe you should think about what they're actually saying and start listening to them, because maybe you'll find that those so-called intolerant voices are actually the reasonable ones and you're the one that is insane. For heaven's sake. Like, you guys are the sorts of people that think that cracking down on immigration is racist. That is the kind of people, anyway, that get called racist these days. I'm going to keep going. This is close to what philosopher Karl Popper called the paradox of tolerance. Yeah, it is a paradox. You can't say that they can't coexist, because then you're being intolerant. Popper wrote that if we extend the unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and the tolerance with them. Yeah, good point. Maybe we should just all be intolerant. Problem solved. Honestly, like, okay, maybe what Karl Popper is referring to is not just talking about ideas. Maybe what he means is, if on that fundamental level you do not agree on the sort of classical liberal democratic values of talking through ideas, and you believe that you need to, I don't know, jihad or something. You need to kill the non-believers and you need to instate your values by force, and there's no discussion and your way is the right way and no one else is right about it. If you're in that situation, then yeah, you need to actually fight back against that kind of viewpoint to protect our way of life, because you can't win a war against an ideological radical culture by talking to them if they do not agree that that is how they decide how society should be run. If they decide by, well, who wins, who kills the other side first, who gets the other side to surrender through violence if necessary, then shut up, Siri, fuck off. Then in that case, you can't rely on dialogue. You can still use it to an extent and hope that it sticks, because I'm sure with some radicals have come back from the brink from hearing or seeing good examples from the other side. But yeah, I mean that is one of those examples where it makes sense to resort to violence. And that says, coincidentally, Popper wrote that sentence in Christchurch as an exile from Nazi-occupied Europe. Yeah, so he gets that there are circumstances where you have to fight against intolerance, but the intolerance that, I don't actually know what exactly Karl Popper had in mind when he was talking about this, but the intolerance that I would have assumed he had in mind would be different to the kind of intolerance that Nywit's talking about. He thinks that people like Lauren Southern, and if he's talking about Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux and that kind of person as being the intolerant ones that we need to fight against, then I don't think that's the spirit in which Popper probably meant it. I don't know. Certainly not the spirit in which I would understand it. The big noise on the right these days is Jordan Peterson. Oh, get wrecked. I haven't read this far yet. the author of the best-selling 12 Rules for Life, who was expected to tour in New Zealand in early 2019. Oh, fuck yeah. Peterson is not an overt white nationalist. Oh, not an overt white nationalist. So are you saying that he's like subversively white nationalist? But a critic of multiculturalism and feminism. Yeah, okay. So again, if he's a critic of multiculturalism, that does not mean that he's subversively a white nationalist, because culture and race are different. They're independent of each other. Nowhere likens him to a gateway drug who spreads ideas that are congenial to and undergird parts of the alt-right and white nationalism generally. You are so wrong about. I mean, honestly, he gets letters from people who were sort of thinking about going to the alt-right, who said, you talked me out of it, you talked sense into me, I won't. He's against those kinds of extreme ideologies. He's got years of background researching the Nazis and the communist Russia, and he has a decent understanding. My God, like, to suggest that he could be a white nationalist, but because he criticizes multiculturalism and feminism, and fairly, in my opinion, that means that his ideas are congenial to and undergird parts of alt-right and white nationalism. That is absolutely, that's a lie. That is a downright lie. You cannot possibly believe that if you have listened to him. He might also be the most famous thinker in the world right now. Great. No, that's great. Again, thanks to YouTube. No, that is a good thing. That is a good thing. It's better than people listening to you. There are slippery definitions. Yeah, I agree. Even Trump is not a would-be fascist, but a populist. Better than a fucking elitist, in my opinion. A reflexive, instinctual racist, rather than an ideologue. I would like to see some evidence that even Trump is not a would-be fascist. What a thing to write. Do you reckon he's not a would-be fascist? Amazing. Just, that sentence is incredible. No, he's not a fascist. A reflexive, instinctual racist? No, he's not. I honestly don't think that cracking down on immigration is racist. I don't think calling whatever that horrible Mexican gang is called, I don't think calling them animals is racist. Almost every time that the press has said, not the press as in this press, but probably as well, I mean generally the press, every time that the news media has said that he's racist or said something racist or whatever, it has been either taken out of context or it was misunderstood. Like, he's a buffoon, but I don't think he's a genuine racist. I haven't seen any evidence of it. His views are based on gut feeling of whatever he pulls out of his butt, as Nowit puts it. Maybe. But in a sense, the leader doesn't matter. What matters is a large number of Americans, possibly as many as 11 million, according to a University of Virginia study, share alt-right beliefs. 11 million are white ethno-nationalists. God, it must be so terrifying believing that. Like, we might as well start arming ourselves because they're going to start a genocide. Like, do you realize that this kind of rhetoric is dangerous? Do you realize what you're doing? My God, it boggles the mind. We always think in terms of leaders, but it's about the followers, Nowit concludes. That's why the cover of my book is an army of white hooded stars. It's not about Trump ultimately. Trump could disappear tomorrow and this movement would be with us for a very long time. So, the comments have been closed. Of course they have. Oh, actually, there are some comments. Free speech cannot remove rights. It's opinion, and like bottoms, everyone has one. Yeah, exactly. Everyone's got a bottom. This is very true. Unless you've had some unfortunate accident. I'm not going to read the comments, but even though I kind of want to, but it's just that this video is nearly an hour long, so I'll stop. But it's honestly, it's incredible. That article is going on about how dangerous these speakers are, these liberal speakers, by making them out to be alt-right and saying that there could be 11 million white ethno-nationalists in the US. Like, how many people are in the US? I don't know, but there is a huge number of people that are potentially basically Nazis. And you don't think that's a problem to tell people that when it's not true at all. I think this is one of the most retarded articles I've ever read. Anyway, sorry it was so long. Thanks for listening. Might do another video eventually at some point. Ta-ta.